Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Welcome. We are so grateful that you are here. Quick commercial before we get into our topic. We've talked about this church history trip that we're going to do this summer. We've had to switch the dates a little bit because there was some conflicts with a few things. So it's going to be July 16th through the 21st. We're going to be touring Palmyra, Kirtland area. We love the company that we're working with. It's called Journeyings, and it's Reed and Diane Robinson, and they're awesome. And they've done tours all over the world. And their whole point of putting this company together is they're trying to really make it seamless, flawless,
and very family friendly.
Very family friendly. They're very easy to work with. They include even all their gratuities ahead of time, so you don't even have to worry about tips or tipping bus drivers. Like, they just think of all the small things to just make it very seamless and flawless. And so, again, it's going to be super awesome. It's going to be $19.95 a person, double occupancy. So they've really gotten it down.
We better clarify that that's $1,995 and not $19.95.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Which apparently is very good, though.
It's a really, really good rate.
Because a lot of these tours are going for $4,000.
Yeah, so they're really trying to get it manageable, that you can come see these church history sites with a guide, get in, get out, really inexpensively. It's a 5-night hotel accommodations included, ground transportation included on a big old nice bus. And of course, having Mark being your tour guide the whole time, teaching you the whole time, 2 meals a day. Anyway, it just has all these really great benefits. It's going with a group. You get to know people so well. It's just super fun. So if you're at all interested, come join the fun. It's going to be awesome.
And like you said, Janie, if you have young single adults, high school kids, maybe even younger children that could hang with that, thing for 5 days, then we'd love to have them.
Yeah. So if you're interested,
email us at preservingfamiliespodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get in touch with you quickly.
Okay, we are now going to tackle this new topic.
Right. So one of the things we want to talk about today and address, and we've thought a lot about this and just feel that there's such a need for it today, and it's this idea of values and teaching values to our children, and in many cases, teaching values to our grandchildren. And we know that we live in a world that, if we can say it this way, that it's becoming valueless, if you want to use that word.
Well, everywhere you look around, we see dishonesty and all manipulation, everything all the time right on our TV screen, in politics, through Hollywood, even, athletic superstars. We just see corruption and no morals, no standards whatsoever anywhere that you look. And they used to even teach those in school many, many years ago.
This is a great dilemma, by the way, today, is that parents are begging schools to teach more values because they're not.
For a while, they wanted to take it out of schools, right? And now everybody's seeing the consequences of that and want it put back in. But we live in a world and a society that is just dwindling in values and any kind of standards whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so that's a big concern for those of us raising children in this generation.
Yeah. I remember, Janie, years ago, I was driving in the car. I was collecting data for my doctoral dissertation. So I was driving to these high schools in Idaho from where we lived in Logan, Utah. And this is where we just had that massive school shooting in Colorado, Columbine, back in the mid-90s or whenever that was. And I just remember I had time to think in the car, and I was like, "What? How do we get to this point where we have this kind of stuff?" And I remember the thought that came to my mind is we live now in a godless society. We've turned away from God, but part of turning away from God is also turning away from godlike values and characteristics. And so we don't have as many people on the whole today teaching their children to be honest, or to work hard, or to be responsible. And frankly, look, parents are on the front lines of teaching their children values. And so if we're not going to do it as parents or as grandparents,
They are not getting it anywhere else. I mean, where would they get it?
Yeah.
Because it's not going on in schools.
It's not going to happen on social media. Or...
And if you're not religious, most religions teach some kind of form of standards, but there's so many agnostics right now that, they're not taking their kids to church. So where are children going to learn these values?
Right.
If we don't as parents
and I know
grandparents.
Janie, both you and I grew up in Texas, and that was... The era that we grew up in there was super cool in my mind because values were highly taught among everyone there. When I say everyone, just across the board. Obviously, not everyone had strong values, but it felt like a lot of people did. But there were expectations that you weren't going to lie or cheat or steal from coaches and teachers. And, once again,
we were taught to respect. And, I mean, we had to say, yes, ma'am, no, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no,
well, that's
sir.
what I was going to say. It was all about manners are part of values. So we had to...
You didn't talk back to your elders. I mean, it was just very Southern, very...
Yeah. And I think that's what has caught you and I off guard as we've been parents now of a new generation where... I remember I only talked back to my dad once, and I never did after that. But only one time, because you knew that you just didn't do that. And so then here we are as parents, and we're all
negotiating.
We're pulling up to the restaurant, and our kids are like, "Hey, I'm not eating here." And we're like, "Well, great, that will save me $20. So you sit out here in the car." Well, but just the freedom that this generation has had to just argue back. I see it at BYU all the time where I'll have students sometimes tell me how I should teach the class or what I should include in the lesson, and I'll think back and think, I would have never dreamed of instructing my professor on how to teach a college class.
And we've addressed, that's a whole different subject, the permissive parenting and the coddling parenting and the helicoptering and the gentle parenting and all that, which is the subject for another day, but yeah, it all has to do with that, right?
Kind of this idea of respect versus disrespect and things like that. So maybe we walk through now just a couple of examples of things that we see or that we've dealt with. So getting back to values now for a minute, but what values can do is they can help structure our life. They can help us make decisions in our lives.
Well, I think of walking along like a bridge or something, that crosses a big cavern. Obviously, it has railings and sides so that we don't fall off, and it keeps us kind of,
on the straight and narrow.
And that's what values do. That's by teaching our children values. It's a kind of a boundary, a kind of a guardrail.
It's a path, for sure.
Right, to keep us on the right path.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like thinking of it as that analogy. But we just don't, in this society, all the guardrails have fallen off. And there's no clear path. And so people are just living their own truth or, deeming themselves what they think is, good or
laws
bad.
Unto themselves,
yeah.
Right? And I think, Janie, based on what you're saying, yes, I agree. And I think, where my mind is going right now is, could you imagine living in a world with no values, right? A world where we don't value kindness, or we don't value honesty, or we don't value morality.
Empathy. We see so many kids these days, or just even people in our society that don't have no empathy for each other. They could watch somebody get shot and they're all just filming versus helping the person, or, that love is lost. And we've got to bring values back. I think the only way we're going to save our society, preserve our families, our homes, is by instilling in our children these values to live by. Whether you are religious or not, I think there's certain standards that every family or every household can come up with through your religion or through your own, what's important to you. But every family has got to set some standards of what they believe.
And those values make our world, our homes, our communities better places, the kind of places we want to live in. And that's what we're trying to create, and it starts with us. I love this poem. Your task to build a better world, God said. I answered, how? The world is such a large, vast place, so complicated now, and I so small and useless am, there's nothing I can do. But God in all his wisdom said, just build a better you. And so I've always liked that idea that it starts with us. We may not be able to change the world, but we can start with ourselves, our families, and reach out from there. Okay, parents, so have you ever had a dilemma like this with your own children or even grandchildren? Ready? Going to a store as probably a 4 or 5-year-old kid and stealing something from the store, arriving home, and then showing my parents what I had taken. Of course, I didn't I didn't tell them that I had stolen it. I told them that I had bought it, but they knew I didn't have any money, so that didn't go over real well. But you know what? The dilemma is, okay, what do you do, parent? Do you just kind of let them slide on that, or are they going to be punished? Do you go back to the store? What are you going to do?
Another example I thought of is, do we allow our 11-year-old to break a fun play date with another friend because another better invitation came along?
Yeah. Or how about this? Have you ever told a lie in front of your children? Like someone calls you on the phone, they're inviting you to their Christmas party, and you make up some great excuse of why you can't be there. And then when you hang up, your kids are looking at you like, wait, we don't have that. What are you talking about? You could have gone to that.
What would happen if our 14-year-old son came home and told us that the friends around them had been cheating on the test? Do we tell them to go tell the teacher? How do we handle that with them?
Yeah. Or even just maybe not even such a dilemma, but just the idea that you have an 18-year-old or 17-year-old teenager and you learn that when they go to their friend's house, their parents aren't there and they're watching very questionable content in a movie or something, or drinking alcohol or whatever, and you're not down with that as a parent, and yet your kids are over there a lot.
What happens when your kids are maybe away on an overnight club team tournament or something, and the coach suggests that they all go to an R-rated movie? How do you help your child deal with things like that?
Yeah. Or one that we know of very well, where a college student here at Brigham Young University, it's important that we say that because there are rules against this, but that their roommate was having a boyfriend sleep with them in their bed. And of course, that's against the honor code.
Trying to navigate how to handle that with our
with
our college age child.
Yeah, do I go talk to the bishop? Do I tell the university? Do I just not say anything? I mean,
so these are all moral dilemmas that we deal with as parents all the time, right? Things come up. Even just the fact that we've had a child before sign up to play on a soccer team and halfway through the season decides, I don't want to do this anymore. Do we allow them to quit? Do we force them to stay? There's all kinds of just dilemmas, different values and things that we come across every day. And how do we teach our children to respond to these? Yeah,
like you say, Janie, if one of your values is we don't quit, we stick with stuff, we stay in there, whether we like it or not, well, then that's going to be a problem. So now we got to figure that out. Right?
And maybe that's not a standard to some people, and maybe that wouldn't be a problem. So let's dive into this topic and talk about values today.
Right, let's do it. Let's quote a few studies here just for a few minutes to just identify. It does seem like parents today do want to teach values to their children and do consider that something important. In this study, 94% of parents said that it's important to teach children responsibility, so that's a value, while nearly as many, 92%, said yes, it's also important to teach them about hard work. So helpfulness, good manners, and independence are also widely viewed as important for children to learn. Those are really important values according to this survey. But when parents were asked which traits they consider to be most important to teach children, the same ones topped the list with one exception. 56% said that passing on their religious faith is important, and 31% say that this is one of the most important things to teach children. Or in other words, did you catch what just happened? 94% said we want to teach our children responsibility. Only 56% said it's important that our children are religious. So I think, Janie, that's really interesting about religion. And this is why this next data set is super important in my mind. Anyone can look this up. It's the 2023 National Parent Survey on Raising Good Kids. And one of the things that they learned in this survey is that very few American children today are learning about the Golden Rule, which is interesting because as religious participation in our country wanes, as it decreases, values are also going to decrease because values are so tied to our religious faith. So listen to this. It says less than 1 in 5 parents, only 14%, said they actually use the Golden Rule phrase with their children at all. And then 28% of parents said that they don't even know what the Golden Rule is.
Wow, the parents themselves don't even know.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, it's going to be hard to teach values if we don't know where some of these things are coming from. Now, in that same study, They identified the top 3 values that parents feel are most important. So here we go. Honesty, 62% of parents said honesty was number 1. Responsibility was number 2. So honesty, 62%. Responsibility, 59%. And respect was number 3 at 52%. So 52% of parents said, yeah, respect is a really important one. 68% of parents in this same study admit that they could be better. They could be more proactive at teaching their children values. They just don't do it that much. They also said in this same study that, 38% of these parents said that their child has lied to them or others. 42% say that their child has been disrespectful to them. 46% say their child has acted spoiled or entitled. You wonder if these numbers are actually higher. 45%.
Because what parent couldn't say that at some point every child has or one child at least has done it.
Right. 45% say their child does not always do the right thing because of the pressure they face with peers. And 36% say their child doesn't always do the right thing because of the influence of social media. So right now, peers are still more influential than social media. So one of the things we really have to guard against, we got to be careful of this, but we don't want to become like Europe and other places have become, nations that began with very much a Christian or religious foundation that now is just waning and becoming so secularized. We know that fewer and fewer Americans are associating with organized religion today, that Gen Z has been called the most, I don't want to say unreligious, but they lack religious participation more than any other generation. There are more nones, N-O-N-E-S, which means just no religious affiliation among Generation Z than any other cohort. So yeah, we worry that this is coming, and so we got to guard against it and be careful, because once again, religion drives so many of the values.
And I look at so many religions. Well, I think almost all religions teach values, standards, right? Morality, kind of things like that our country's been founded on all these years. And so again, we're not saying that it has to be one religion. All religions teach good kind of standards.
Another data point, Janie, is that 72% of parents in this survey felt that values and character is less emphasized today than when they were growing up. And I would say, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that was really kind of drilled into us, right? Of these standards and values.
Because as religiosity decreases, so do standards and values and expectations.
Right.
And then there's a direct correlation there.
Right. Oh, for sure. Then here's one last thought. And it's kind of funny, but it's kind of this idea that, why are you so worried about the speck in my eye when you have a beam in your own? But what the survey showed is that parents are a lot more worried about other children in general compared to their own children. And so 90% of parents believe that other children don't treat others with respect. That most children, 85% say that most children are not honest. 85% say that children today don't show gratitude.
Those are high numbers.
Yeah. This is 85%. Yeah. 84% believe that children today are lazy.
Wow.
And 83% say that children today only care about themselves. But when they did the same study with their own children, the numbers were a lot lower. My kids are actually pretty good, so anyway. So one of the things that we want to kind of identify here is, if we kind of took this into a spiritual place as we kind of consider this, one of the words that I've just been really interested in, because I've heard it used in general conference a time or two, which is mooring. You've heard the word mooring? So I looked it up. A mooring, it's the ropes, the chains, or the anchors by which a boat, ship, or buoy is moored or anchored. So a ship that has slipped its moorings kind of has basically been, washed out to sea or whatever. So here's President Monson a few years ago. The world seems to have slipped from the moorings of safety and drifted from the harbor of peace. That's exactly what happens, by the way, when you lose your moorings. You slip and now you're in the drift and in the current. Permissiveness, immorality, pornography, and the power of peer pressure cause many to be tossed about on a sea of sin and crushed on the jagged reefs of lost opportunities, forfeited blessings, and shattered dreams. There's really no question that we live in a world today that has lost its values, its principles, its moorings, so to speak. I was just reading in Moroni chapter 9, verse 20 a little while ago, and here's what it says. Behold, thou knowest the wickedness of this people. Thou knowest that they are without principle and past feeling. Their wickedness basically exceeds that of the Lamanites, but they became a people that were valueless. They didn't have principles that they lived by. And when you have a society that doesn't have principles or values or moorings, then that society becomes degenerate, it becomes chaotic, it becomes evil, it becomes wicked. And that's what happens. I mean, if you read in Moroni chapter 9, these people end up not only murdering each other and raping each other, but eating each other. I mean, they turn to cannibalism. And obviously that's not what we want, right? We want a civilized society. And one of the reasons why we feel so strongly about this topic today is because values matter. They're crucial for many, many reasons. I know in my life they've been crucial. And so the beautiful thing is that we can teach these principles in our homes, right? As the world becomes darker, more chaotic, and more evil, we can be lights in a very dark world, and those lights can make all the difference. Those lights can help draw people towards the light, which is Christ himself. You know, I think, Janie, back on my own upbringing and the family that brought me into the church that were so influential in my life. This is who they were. I mean, they were lights. I mean, they lived the gospel. They were all in. They were committed. They were fun. They were happy. They were hopeful. They were optimistic. And they were solid in their religious faith. And I was so impressed by that as a 16-year-old. And I've told our own children this before, but if that family, if those kids would have been dishonest or lazy or immoral or corrupt or alcoholics in high school or whatever, I wouldn't have been drawn to that at all. I would have just said, okay, your religion has no impact on your life any more than mine does, right? But this family, they were light shining in a dark world. They radiated goodness. And because of that, I was drawn to that. And I think that that's maybe just one reason. If not, there's 100 other reasons why. I mean, I think these values bring happiness into our lives. I know that as I live a life that's embedded in these type of values, and we're going to talk about a lot of them today, but there's happiness in there. And for me, that's what made all the difference in the world. That is what led me as a teenager to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and ultimately becoming baptized and being a part of the church, and now hopefully being a light to others ourselves, right, in our own family.
Mark, just to have a little fun here, just to see how far we've transitioned in, a couple hundred years.
As a society, right?
As a society. That in the book called The Making of George Washington by William Wilbur, it talks about how, as a child, George Washington growing up back, in the New England area, there was a book called the New England Primer, which all the children were required to read and to memorize these values. And here's what some of the rules.
It would be kind of like our articles of faith, I guess, right? Okay. Something like that.
Yeah, and George Washington had to memorize these, and they had to live by these rules. And it said, I will fear God and honor the king. So obviously that was before the Americas were formed, right? They were still part of England.
Part of England, yeah.
So we can get rid of that part. I will honor my father and mother. I will obey my superiors. I will submit to my elders. I will love my friends. I will hate no man. I will forgive my enemies and pray to God for them. I will, as much as it lies in me, to keep all of God's holy commandments.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? These children were taught this in the public school
This was part of the
setting.
American culture in those days of memorizing these values and trying to live by them.
It's amazing.
And I think that's great. So, yeah,
Can you imagine what would happen to our society today if we lived these rules?
Yeah.
If our children were taught these and we all lived by these simple sayings?
We would have had a lot of peace in our house just with I will submit to my elders, right? That would have been great. So what we've done is we've read several books, we've read several articles, and over time we have identified about 50 values. And once again, we do not want to overwhelm anyone. We don't want you to think, okay, you got to teach all 50 of these values to your children.
Or claim that this is an all-inclusive list. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, maybe there's 10,000 values. I don't know. But we certainly want to share with you some of these. And then what you could do, of course, we would be happy to share the list with you at preservingfamiliespodcast@gmail.com. But we want to just identify them. And then in my mind, if I'm out there listening and I'm the father of a family and if my wife is here as the mother, I'm thinking, hey, you know what we ought to do? Why don't we pick 10 of these that we really want to kind of work on or something, or 12 or whatever. And probably can't do them all. By the way, a lot of them you may say, we already kind of do that. So you wouldn't have to worry about that one. But here's a list of several right here, just so you know what we're talking about. I think accountability is a good value, to be accountable, to be flexible, adaptable or flexible, to be authentic, to be charitable, to be considerate or compassionate. How about this one? To have courage, to be dependable and diligent, to have empathy, to be generous, but also gentle, to practice gratitude, to be honest, to be humble, to be industrious. That would just be a short little list. How about more?
A few that I liked were kindness and friendliness, leadership, dependability, merciful, obedient, playful, fun, teaching our children the need for that, respectful, self-disciplined, spiritual, sportsmanship. There's so many kids that need that.
Need that lesson, right?
Trustworthiness, unselfishness, work ethic. There's just so many. We could go on and on and on.
And so now it comes to this. It comes to, okay, what is our role, as parents and grandparents? Because I think grandparents can teach values as well. And you heard us mention this at the front part of this podcast, that parents are definitely on the front lines. It's their God-given responsibility to teach morals and values, to help provide their children with a moral compass. Listen to this statement from Ralphie Jacobs. 80% of children who had a high level of values taught in their homes through childhood will return to the values of childhood even if they flounder through adolescence. So that's kind of a cool thought, right? And then, of course, the other one is
from the Bible, to train up a child in the way that they will go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it. I think that's huge, and I think that's why we have to teach early and often.
Yeah.
All the principles that we want our children to know, because even if they do wander, they'll come back. They've got those core roots.
Right. Totally. Well, I'm just going to quote Tad Callister for a minute, that as parents, we are to be the prime gospel teachers and examples for our children. And he basically says not anyone else, not teachers, not coaches, not
religious leaders.
Yeah, it's us. And so this is our job, to teach these values. And we're going to talk about how to teach these in just a minute. But Janie, I think it'd be kind of fun if we just maybe we identify a value or two that would be fun to talk about, how we taught those in our home. And once again, we can't give examples for 50 values, but we certainly can talk about some of these.
Number 2 is that we actually need to teach lessons about values in a formal setting. We don't just hope that they're going to get these by osmosis. We actually need to talk about them. And
be calculated and deliberate about it, right?
Right. So we can teach them at family home evening, which is a meeting that we have. We try to set aside one night a week, like a Monday night or Sunday night, to teach our children. And so we could use those times. We could use times around the dinner table to talk about manners, to talk about standards, to talk about values, and just choose one for the week that we're all going to work on as a family, or one for the month that we're all going to work on in family. But I think they actually need to be verbalized, and we need to talk about the why behind it, why we as parents value that, why we as a family value that. I think that's really important.
And then you can put an emphasis on it so that it's brought up a lot over and over, like let's say that month. For example, in our home, we went and bought the book called Teaching Your Children Values by Richard and Linda Iyer, and we selected one value every month to talk about. And I still remember that one month when we were doing honesty. And part of in their book, they talk about making an honesty pact in your family where everyone's going to tell the truth, everyone's going to be honest. And then sure enough, at our home, what happened is not long after that, the Girl Scouts delivered those addictive Thin Mint cookies and for 3 or 4 boxes that we bought on the doorstep. I remember we told all of our kids, they all wanted them. We said, hey guys, just go do all your chores, and if you do all your chores, you can have some. And so all of our children went to work except for one. We couldn't find one of our children, and then we finally found her. She was behind a couch, and she had a mouthful of Thin Mint cookies. I mean, it was like a chipmunk, right? She had like 3 or 4 cookies like in each cheek. And I asked her, I said, are you eating those cookies? And she said, no. No. Do you have cookies in your mouth? No. every question I asked her, when she would answer, cookie chunks were flying out of her mouth, you know. Finally, she started to cry, you know, and I said, "Why did you lie? Remember, we have this honesty pact. You were going to tell the truth." And I remember she was crying. She goes, "I forgot." She forgot to be honest. But so that's why we have to keep at this, right? We can't just do it one time. But once again, we tried to emphasize that whole month in dinner table conversations, in lessons, in the car.
That's a good example. I know one of our daughters bought a book they got it at Costco, and it talked about manners. Mm-hmm. And so every night at dinner time, they'll talk about manners or values or standards that, you know, that they want their children to know. And I just think that's a great time and a great opportunity. We kind of have a captive audience, right?
Yeah.
But I think it just really needs to be intentional. So we can't just hope they get it. I think we actually need to address these.
I think number 3 could be doing this in a more informal way, right? You mentioned Janie, the dinner table. Maybe that's more formal, but in the car, while we're working together, while we're laying in their bed at night, talking to them about their day or whatever, just having these conversations and letting them talk and re-emphasizing some of these principles.
And I think these things come up all the time in daily conversation. So if we see somebody maybe not exemplifying honesty or somebody not exemplifying kindness, we could point that out to our kids and say, "Oh, that's wrong. Like, we don't do that in our family. We choose to be kind," or
we want to be hard workers.
Right. So we can be constantly teaching the principle without ramming it down their throat, but I think it can become just natural conversation. So the next one, maybe even role play with our children. What would you do in this circumstance? You know, what would you do if somebody offered you this? You know, there's all kinds of different ways that we can prepare our children to go out into society. I know this over the weekend during General Conference here in Utah, they always have commercials in between
General Conference
sessions. And one that they kept playing over and over was an underage drinking commercial. And so it had the mom and the daughter, and she would say, "Now, honey, you know that we do not drink alcohol underage. It ruins our brain." And she'd go through. And then the statistics were, if you talk to your child about this over and over, your children won't, you know, underage drink, was the whole point of this commercial.
Message, yeah.
But I thought, yeah, that's so important that we have to actually open our mouths and teach and talk to our children, because they do absorb this and they do take on our values and what's important.
Right.
And so...
And to all the grandparents out there, don't be shy on some of this stuff. We've done a lot of role plays with our grandkids, and they actually think it's hilarious. So get the grandkids involved and orchestrate some of those role plays.
It can be really fun.
Yeah.
The next one that we want to talk about is when we do see our children living our values or exemplifying these awesome attributes or values, we need to compliment them and point them out to them. Yeah. I think there's so many times that we just are like, "Oh, good, they did that," or we're proud of them, but we don't verbalize it. And I think it's so important that when we do see them being kind to someone, holding the door open for someone, being respectful, working hard, being honest, telling us the truth, admitting their faults or whatever, we need to say, "Thank you so much. I'm so proud of you." And then we need to verbalize the trait. So if we see them being responsible and getting good grades, or if we see them...
What I was going to say is working hard, because we have 2 families in our family that have chickens now. And we've become very aware that 2 grandsons from 2 different families are gathering those eggs in the morning, going through the neighborhood with their little wagon and selling those eggs and making tons of money, right?
So we need to
say, "Hey, Joe and Cannon, way to go, man. Way to go."
Identify that as how responsible and hardworking they are.
Right.
Or even we had a daughter once who the teacher called me and said, "You know, your daughter is so kind to this handicapped child in the class. She helps him put his jacket on. She helps get him things. She pushes his wheelchair to lunch. And I just wanted you to know how, you know, kind that she is to this young man." We had no idea. Yeah. She hadn't said a word to us about it. And how nice it was to sit her down and say, "That is so kind of you for being so empathetic and so kind, you know, to this boy." And anyway, just calling our children, like giving it a name and praising our children and helping them see these great attributes that they have in each of them.
Here's a great principle. Rewarded behavior continues. Rewarded behavior continues. So when we reward a behavior, the probability of it happening again is very strong. I think the last one we would talk about is just, especially when our children get older, to talk to them and to help them understand and see how their values could help them make decisions in their life. Because we all know that they're going to have great big decisions to make in their lives. Even as teenagers, they'll have big decisions. I know, Janie, for us, one of them was a daughter who had volleyball tournaments on Sunday, and we had to really work through that and decide, okay, what are the values that we can identify that are going to help us make the right decision here on if that's something our family should do or not do. And then maybe one more principle of how we can teach values in our home. I know we said the other one was last one, but no, this one's too good. But parents, we could always be looking for stories, experiences, scriptures, quotations from people.
They're all around us.
Right. And use those to teach values. For example, one of those values could be patience. And we grabbed this from a great talk that President at the time, Dieter F. Uchtdorf, gave in General Conference years ago called Continue in Patience. Here's his story that in the 1960s, a professor at Stanford University began a modest experiment testing the willpower of 4-year-old children. He placed before them a large marshmallow and then told them that they could eat it right away, or if they waited 15 minutes, they could have 2 marshmallows. He then left the children alone and watched what happened behind a two-way mirror. Some of the children ate the marshmallow immediately. Some could wait only a few minutes before giving it into temptation. Only 30% were able to wait. And by the way, Janie, you may remember that some of our own children did this experiment with their kids, and it was funny.
It was funny.
It was mildly interesting. It was a mildly interesting experiment, and the professor moved on to other areas of research. For in his own words, there are only so many things you can do with kids trying not to eat marshmallows. But as time went on, he kept track of the children and began to notice an interesting correlation. The children who could not wait struggled later in life and had more behavioral problems, while those who waited tended to be more positive and better motivated, have higher grades and incomes, and healthier relationships. What started as a simple experiment with children and marshmallows became a landmark study suggesting that the ability to wait, to be patient, was a key character trait that might predict later success in life. Now, once again, what a great story told in one of our general conferences by one of our leaders, but also the principle, the value of patience. I mean, I'm already thinking, okay, if we were going to teach this in our home, certainly we could tell that story. There's a video now that goes with it, or we could even try the experiment, especially if we had little kids in our home, right?
Mark, I think there's stories and examples everywhere we look. We can look back to our founding fathers who had, did incredible things. Our early church leaders that did incredible things. Our ancestors, people in our family have done incredible things. Olympians, on and on, of people that have achieved goals, who have sacrificed, who have these great qualities that we can share with our children and grandchildren. We can always be sharing inspirational stories to help them grow and to inspire to become wonderful people.
Yeah, I was going to say, so maybe collecting some of these that you really feel are important, I think would be a great... I still think of the movie Chariots of Fire from 40 years ago that taught a great principle of how important the Sabbath day is as a value. So yeah, I think we can grab those stories from anywhere. For example, here's one of those stories I think we can conclude with today that was given at a BYU devotional called "Make Yourself an Honest Man" by Victor L. Brown. This talk was also, or this story was also told by President James E. Faust in General Conference years ago, and it's a great story about honesty. Here's how it goes. Now, I'd like to share with you a lesson that a young man has taught. This, to me, is one of the most touching lessons of integrity that I've ever read. This is the true story of Elam Hill, the director of physical education at Sequoia Junior High School. And here's his story. Today I saw truth, and for a moment I lived and breathed in a great presence of truth and felt its sweetness plunge deep into my soul. I am a coach in a junior high school. I work with 500 boys each day. This has been my occupation for over 20 years. I enjoy it. Traditionally, I'm supposed to be rugged, tough, crusty, yes, even a little severe at times. And yet underneath this exterior, feeling and understanding must exist if the job is to be done. Today was a test in climbing the rope. We climbed from a standing start to a point 15 feet high. One of my tasks these past few weeks has been to train and teach the boys to negotiate this distance in as few seconds as possible. The school record for the event is 2.1 seconds. It has stood for 3 years. Today, this record was broken, but this is not my story. How this record was broken is the important thing here, as it is so often in many endeavors in life. For 3 years, Bobby Palacio, a 14-and-a-half-year-old 9th grade Hispanic boy, has trained and has pointed, I suspect, dreamed of breaking this record. It has been his consuming passion. It seemed his whole life depended on owning this record. In his first 3 attempts, Bobby climbed the rope in 2.1 seconds, tying the record. On the second try, the watch stopped at 2.0 seconds flat, a record. But as he descended the rope and the entire class gathered around to check the watch, I knew I must ask Bobby a question. There was a slight doubt in my mind whether or not the board at the 15-foot height had been touched. If he missed, and it was so very close, not more than a fraction of an inch, and only Bobby knew the answer. As he walked toward me expressionless, I said, "Bobby, did you touch?" If he had said yes, the record he had dreamed since he was a skinny 7th grader and had worked for almost daily would be his, and he knew I would trust his word. With the class already cheering for him and for his performance, the slim, brown-skinned boy shook his head negatively, and in this simple gesture, I witnessed a moment of greatness. Coaches do not cry, only babies cry, they say, but as I reached out to pat this boy on the shoulder, there was a small drop of water in each eye, and it was with effort through a tight throat that I told the class, this boy has not set a record in the rope climb. No, he has set a much finer record for you and for everyone to strive for. He has told the simple truth. I turned to Bobby and said, "Bobby, I'm so proud of you. You have just set a record that many athletes will never attain. Now, on your last try, I want you to jump a few inches higher on the takeoff. You're going to break the record." After the other boys had finished their next turns and Bobby came up to the rope for his try, a strange stillness came over the gymnasium. 50 boys and 1 coach were breathlessly set to help boost Bobby Palacio to a new record. He climbed the rope in 1.9 seconds, a school record, a city record, and perhaps close to a national record for a junior high school boy. When the bell rang and I walked away, now misty-eyed, from this group of boys, I was thinking, Bobby, little brown skin and your clear, bright, dark eyes and your straight, trim body. Bobby, at 14, you are a better man than I. Thank you for climbing so very high today. Well, what a great story. And what a great story to teach the value of honesty. And so for Let's Do Something, our invitation today to all of you is to either A, identify a story from your own life, or B, find a story somewhere that teaches an important value and share that with your children or grandchildren and share why it's important to you. And maybe even follow up with that later so that it stays in their heart and mind. And let's teach our children and grandchildren these values. It will make all the difference in the world for them, the community that they live in, and the world that they're trying to affect. Everyone, have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to being with you again next time. Until then, have a great, great